The first time I saw Karen Whitmore stomping across my dock in her stiff beige Caprice and HOA-issued clipboard, I should have known she was about to pull something ridiculous. But I didn't expect her to threaten me over the dock I've had since, before the HOA even existed. "This dock is in violation of Section 16, Paragraph 9, she announced, tapping her pen like a gavel. "You'll need to remove it within 15 days or face daily fines." I leaned on the railing, sipping my coffee. "Karen, I built this dock 15 years ago." "Long before Sunrise Shores HOA was even a thing," she sniffed. "Irrelevant. All properties are subject to current code. That includes unauthorized structures on community waterfront." I raised an eyebrow. "Community waterfront? You mean my lakefront? This lakefront is part of the shared neighborhood aesthetic. It belongs to everyone now." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You're telling me my private land that I pay taxes on is now shared?" Karen didn't flinch. "Correct. The HOA acquired jurisdiction after the revised charter passed." That was a lie. I never agreed to any revised charter. In fact, I'd gone to great lengths to keep my 5-acre property out of HOA control when they formed last year. Everyone else in Sunrise Shores signed up for their rules and dues. I didn't, because I knew better. I watched her march back up the gravel trail, muttering into her walkie. I wasn't worried yet. I had survey maps, property deeds, permits, everything locked up in a fireproof safe. But something about the smug way she walked off made me uneasy. That evening, I drove my ATV to the West Ridge above the lake and saw what I'd missed until now. 3 prefab cabins, all identical, recently built along the shore. They weren't there a month ago, and they were sitting directly on my land that wrapped around the lake in a horseshoe shape. Somehow, the HOA had carved out a slice and started selling lakefront rentals for seasonal profit. I stood there staring at the glowing porch lights of the cabins, too stunned to even curse. They wanted me to tear down my dock for violating rules. Too bad they built their cabins on my lakefront. The next morning, I drove straight into town. I stopped first at the county clerk's office and requested copies of the original property plat and the most recent filings from the HOA. It took the clerk a while to dig through the archives, but the moment she handed me the rolled-up blueprints, I could already tell something was wrong. A thick red line had been drawn across my property, rerouting the lakefront boundary eastward just enough to shift ownership of the western curve to common space. The problem? That line didn't exist in the original plat. Someone had filed a revised map without my signature. I unrolled both maps on the counter, side by side. The original was dated and notarized from over 15 years ago. The revised version was time-stamped 6 months prior and bore the HOA's name on a submitted application labeled "Correction to Parcel Boundaries Approved for Community Development Use." "Who approved this correction?" I asked, tapping the corner of the newer map. The clerk peered over her glasses. "Looks like it was rubber-stamped by the county zoning office. You'd have to talk to them for more details." I did just that. At the zoning department, a tired-looking woman named Rita pulled up the digital file and frowned as she scrolled through the approval form. "Funny," she mumbled, clicking through attachments. "This was pushed through during the holidays. December 28th, signed off by a temp inspector, Gerald Monk." "Is Monk still around?" She shook her head. "Seasonal hire. Contract ended right after New Year's. Worked here 3 weeks. Left no forwarding info." I leaned in. "Did he verify the changes in person?" "No field notes. That's the weird part. Normally there's a site visit log. This one's blank." She glanced up, her eyebrows pinched. "You might want to talk to a land use attorney." I didn't need a lawyer yet. What I needed first was proof. So I headed back to the homestead and fired up my trail cam software. I'd mounted 6 weatherproof cameras around the lake after a break-in last year. Most of the footage was uneventful raccoons, deer, a few neighborhood kids sneaking in to fish. But I found what I was looking for. 4 months ago, just after sunset, a crew in dark utility jackets rolled up in an unmarked pickup. They unloaded surveying gear and walked the perimeter of the western lakefront. Odd thing was, none of them ever came to my door. They took measurements, flagged trees, and left within an hour. None of them wore county badges. The next clip showed construction equipment arriving a week later. Modular cabin shells were craned into place overnight. No permits were posted. No inspections logged. And not once did anyone notify me. I downloaded the footage, labeled each file, and backed everything up on 2 thumb drives. I dropped one in my safe and took the other with me. By the time I returned to town, I'd made an appointment with the sheriff's office. Deputy Morales met me in a small office behind the front desk. I laid out the evidence, recorded footage, the altered boundary map, and the conflicting plats. She took one look at the video and sat up straighter. Who owns these new cabins again? HOA. They've been marketing them as rental retreats for dues-paying members. She flipped through the printed screenshots and maps. If they altered property lines and filed it under false pretenses, that's forgery, possibly fraud. I didn't authorize any boundary changes. Never signed a release, she nodded. We'll need to open an investigation. I'll get a property crimes unit assigned. Back at home, I noticed something new. A glossy sign had been staked in the ground near the dock. Community use area, no trespassing without HOA permission. They'd even planted a trash receptacle and one of those generic park benches nearby, like they were trying to make it look official. The nerve. That evening, I called a friend, Marty, a retired state land assessor. I asked him to meet me the next morning. When he arrived, he brought a laser transit, a GPS mapping unit, and a binder full of state land use codes. We spent 3 hours walking the perimeter of my property, confirming coordinates and elevation markers. After he punched the final data into his tablet, he looked up and whistled low. They built all 3 cabins squarely on your land. No easement, no lease, no recorded transfer. That's trespassing and encroachment, plain and simple. I snapped a photo of him holding the GPS unit in front of the cabins. Mind writing me a signed report? Already planning to, he said, scribbling into his notebook. They're in deep trouble if they tried to reassign your boundaries without a recorded deed transfer. I emailed copies of the report to Deputy Morales and attached a formal complaint. She called me that night. We've reviewed the footage. The construction crew wasn't licensed with the county. The zoning file was improperly submitted. The cabins have no occupancy permits. We're freezing access to the structures until we sort this out. The following morning, Karen showed up again, this time with 2 other board members in tow. She stood at the edge of my dock, arms crossed, mouth tight. You've gone too far, she snapped. We've received notice from the sheriff's department. You've interfered with authorized HOA improvements. I stepped down from the porch, holding a printed copy of the surveyor's report in one hand and a cease and desist order in the other. You built on private land, filed false documents, marketed rentals on property that isn't yours, and now you're accusing me of interference. That land was reassigned legally under the revised charter. I held up the original plat. This charter doesn't overrule recorded deeds. And you filed those changes without my signature. That's criminal. One of the board members, a man I didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably and glanced at Karen. We were told the boundaries were already adjusted. That the county approved everything. They were misled, I said, locking eyes with her. That's what happens when you play land baron with forged filings. Karen's jaw twitched. You think you've won? I don't need to win, I said. I just need the truth to come out. And right now, the sheriff's office is going through every rental agreement you've signed, every dollar collected, and every permit you never filed. She said nothing. As they turned to leave, I noticed the man lagging behind. He paused near the sign they'd planted the day before and yanked it out of the ground. Without a word, he tossed it into the back of their golf cart. That night, I received an email from Deputy Morales. The county was issuing a stop work order on all HOA construction projects. The district attorney's office had requested additional documentation, and a formal investigation into fraudulent filings was now underway. I sat on the dock, watching the moon reflect off the lake. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the ground under my boots still belonged to me, and no amount of clipboards or phony charters could change that. Deputy Morales called me again 2 days later. This time her tone was sharper, more focused. "We've got something," she said. "You'll want to come down to the station." I drove into town without delay, my boots still caked in lake mud, and jeans dusted with sawdust from a shed I'd been reinforcing. When I walked into the briefing room, Morales was standing beside a whiteboard covered in photos, maps, and a flowchart that looked like it belonged in a fraud case, not a zoning dispute. She didn't waste time. We subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications. Turns out this land grab wasn't just paperwork fraud. It's tied to a larger scheme. She pointed to a name at the top of the board, Theodore R. Mays, a real estate developer from 2 counties over. He funded the Sunrise Shores HOA's startup costs last year. In exchange, he got rights to develop any unused common space the HOA could acquire. That includes land they could claim as community property. I folded my arms. So they tried to reclassify my lakefront to hand it off to him. Exactly. The cabins were just phase 1. Mays planned to install a full retreat center, private docks, boat rentals, even a clubhouse. The HOA board signed a lease agreement with his company 6 months ago. They didn't expect you to notice or fight back. Where is he now? Lawyered up. But the DA's office already froze his assets related to the project. As for Karen and the board, they're being questioned today. She handed me a folder. Inside were copies of the lease, emails between Karen and Mays, and a financial ledger tracking rental income from the cabins, all deposited into an account labeled Community Beautification Fund. Not $1 had been spent on beautification. I flipped through the records. Any chance they'll be charged? The DA is reviewing multiple counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful land conversion, and misuse of public trust under HOA governance. If it sticks, we're looking at felony charges. I leaned back in the chair, letting that settle. What do you need from me? Testimony. And that original property survey. We need to establish that your land was never transferred or leased willingly. You'll have both. By the time I left the station, word had already begun to spread. I passed a cluster of residents gathered outside the general store. Usually they kept to themselves, but this time, a few nodded at me. One even tipped his hat. Back home, I noticed a white SUV parked near the cabins. A woman with a camera was photographing the structures from every angle. I walked up slowly. "Press?" I asked. She looked up. "Freelance investigative. Heard there was an ongoing fraud case involving a lakeside HOA and illegal development. You the landowner?" I nodded. She motioned toward the cabins. "Did you know they were advertising these as eco-retreat getaways on rental sites? Claimed the land was community-owned green space, even listed a fake environmental certificate. Did they now?" She lowered her camera. "The listing's gone now, but I have screenshots." "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" We sat near the edge of the lake, under the shade of a poplar tree. I told her everything from the forged boundary map to the construction crews sneaking in after dark. She listened, took notes, and asked the right questions. When she packed up, she handed me a card. "This story's going to get attention, more than just local." That evening, a code enforcement truck pulled up near the cabins. A pair of inspectors walked the property, measuring foundations and marking violations with orange tape. One of them paused to speak with me. "We're issuing demolition orders," he said. "These structures fail to meet setback regulations, floodplain codes, and they're built on land not zoned for commercial use." "They shouldn't exist." Glad to hear it. As they worked, a silver sedan rolled up the driveway. Karen stepped out, flanked by a man in a navy suit I didn't recognize. Her expression was tight but not angry, more like someone trying to salvage a ship halfway sunk. The man approached first. "Mr. Rourke," I'm Tom Halpern, representing the Sunrise Shores HOA. We'd like to discuss a potential settlement. I didn't move. Settlement for what? Trespassing, unauthorized development. Fraud. We're prepared to offer a full restoration of your property lines and a formal apology signed by the board. In exchange, we'd ask that you refrain from pursuing additional legal claims. I tilted my head. Is that before or after the criminal charges? Karen stepped forward. Look, this got out of hand. Mistakes were made, but dragging this into court will divide the community. You divided the community the moment you built rentals on land you didn't own. She tried to keep her tone even. The board believed the land had been transferred. We were misled. You weren't misled, you lied, and now you're trying to rewrite the ending. Halpern cleared his throat. We're offering financial restitution as well, including back rent for the cabins. It's a generous offer. The only offer I'm interested in, I said, is seeing every one of those board members barred from holding office again, and I want a permanent injunction against any future HOA claims on my land. That's extreme. No. What's extreme is filing fake plats and leasing out someone else's backyard. Karen's jaw was set, but her eyes flicked to the code enforcement team behind me. One of them had just posted a red tag on the cabin porch, uninhabitable, demolition pending. They left without shaking hands. The next day, the county issued a formal statement confirming that the cabins had been constructed without permits, on land not zoned for development, and without the landowner's consent. The DA's office followed with an announcement of pending charges against 3 HOA board members, including Karen, for conspiracy and document fraud. A week later, heavy machinery rolled in. The cabins came down in under a day. Every board member involved in the scheme resigned before the week was out. The HOA scrambled to hold emergency elections, but turnout was abysmal. Half the neighborhood refused to participate. I received a letter from the DA's office thanking me for cooperating and informing me that, due to the egregious nature of the fraud, the county would be pursuing civil penalties against both Mays and the HOA itself. One afternoon, I was splitting firewood when Marty showed up again. He handed me a new survey, stamped and signed. County asked me to recertify your borders. Guess they don't want any wiggle room this time. I tucked the paper into my workshop's steel locker. They learning their lesson. Let's just say, anyone thinking about messing with your land again is going to have to think twice and hire a better lawyer. That night, I sat out on my dock watching the fireflies flicker along the water's edge. The trash bin and bench were long gone. The fake community sign had been shredded during demolition. The lake was quiet again. The HOA still existed, technically. But no one I knew was paying dues anymore. With half the board under investigation and their biggest revenue stream reduced to a pile of splinters, their power had withered. They tried to pave over my rights with ink and arrogance. Too bad they built their fantasy on land that never belonged to them. The first hearing was held in the county courthouse on a Tuesday morning, and I showed up in my cleanest flannel shirt and worn leather boots. I wasn't interested in pretense, just in making sure the lies didn't stand. The courtroom was small, paneled in dark wood, with peeling brass nameplates from a different era. Judge Harwood, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, sat at the bench. The first item on the docket, People v. Karen Whitmore, Gregory Salter, and Denise Paulson fraud, unlawful land conversion, filing of falsified official documents, and conspiracy to defraud a property owner. I took a seat behind the prosecutor while Karen and the other 2 defendants sat stiffly across the aisle, each with their own attorney. The developer, Mays, wasn't there. His case had been split off and escalated to state court after investigators uncovered forged signatures on multiple zoning submissions across 3 counties. I heard they found a stash of blank notary stamps in his office. Deputy DA Leanne Briggs opened the proceedings with a quiet confidence that filled the room more than any shouting could. She laid out the facts methodically. The doctored boundary filings, the unlicensed construction, the rental income tucked discreetly into a fund that, even under HOA policy, was never authorized for private profit. Then she turned to me. I was called to testify just before noon. I stood, took the oath, and stepped up to the witness box. Briggs kept her questions direct. "Mr. Rourke, can you describe the process you followed when you built your dock?" I nodded. "Filed a permit with the county, got approval, and installed it with a contractor 15 years ago. It's been inspected twice since then. No issues. Did you ever agree to join the Sunrise Shores HOA? No, I declined when the neighborhood association was formed. I've kept my property independent the entire time. Did you authorize any changes to your property lines? Never. And how did you discover the cabins? Spotted them from the ridge. I checked my cameras afterward. They brought in materials at night. No crews ever approached me and no signs were posted." She turned toward the judge. "No further questions." Karen's lawyer rose. His suit was expensive, but he looked rattled. "Mr. Rourke, would you say the HOA's intention was malicious, or just mistaken?" I'd say they believed I wouldn't fight back. There was a shuffle behind me. Someone stifled a cough. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The defense didn't press further. The evidence was too overwhelming for spin. During the recess, I stepped outside for air. The courthouse lawn buzzed with reporters and residents. One man, gray hair, hands in his jacket, approached me quietly. "Name's Robert. Used to be on the HOA advisory board. I resigned 6 months ago." I studied him. "Why?" "They stopped holding transparency meetings. Karen and Greg started doing business behind closed doors. When I asked about the cabins, they told me to mind my role." "You know about the land documents?" He nodded. "Greg brought in a guy from out of town, some consultant who claimed he had back channels in zoning. That's when things stopped adding up. They said they'd handle the paperwork." "You willing to say that under oath?" He met my eyes. "I already gave a statement to the DA. Yours was the only property they tried to reclassify. The rest of the neighborhood fell under HOA control willingly. But your land blocked their lakefront expansion plans." Back inside, Briggs called her final witness, a forensic document examiner named Ava Rosen. She explained how the revised plat the HOA submitted contained pixel-level inconsistencies in the signature box. The notary's seal had been copied from an unrelated file. The seal number belonged to a notary who'd been deceased for over 2 years. Karen's face paled as Rosen clicked through her slides. By the time the judge adjourned that day's session, no one doubted this hadn't been a misunderstanding. It was a scheme, a bold one. 3 weeks later, the ruling came down. Judge Harwood delivered it in less than 15 minutes. The defendants knowingly submitted falsified documents to the county office in order to secure a financial deal with a private developer, thereby infringing on private property rights with no legal authority. The court finds all 3 defendants guilty on all counts. He sentenced Karen and Greg to 6 months in county jail and 2 years probation. Denise received a suspended sentence due to her cooperation with investigators. The court also levied fines totaling over $80,000. But that wasn't the part that mattered most to me. The judge also issued a permanent injunction barring the HOA from making any future claims on my land. They were ordered to issue a public retraction of the false filings and to pay for the complete restoration of my shoreline, including the removal of debris left behind by the demolished cabins. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into a morning that felt lighter than any in months. The same reporter who'd interviewed me by the lake was there, camera ready. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked past her toward the hills. "I go back to living without people pretending they own what they don't." I didn't attend the next HOA meeting, but I heard through the grapevine it lasted under 10 minutes. A vote was called to dissolve the board entirely. No one objected. The remaining members agreed to hire an outside administrator to wind things down and refund any unused dues. The HOA's office, once proudly marked with a banner that read, "Preserving Our Neighborhood Vision," was shuttered before the week was out. 2 months later, the county sent me a letter confirming that the false documents had been purged from the land records and replaced with the originals. A final certified plat was enclosed, signed, sealed, and filed with the proper coordinates intact. Later that summer, I rebuilt the dock gate and added a small sign to the post, "Private Dock. No HOA access, no exceptions." It wasn't meant to provoke, just a reminder of what happens when people forget boundaries, real ones. On a warm afternoon not long after, I was stacking kindling when Robert came by again, this time with a thermos and 2 tin cups. "Thought you might want some coffee," he said, holding it out. "Figured we could talk about restoring that old fishing pier down the bend." I took the cup and nodded. "As long as nobody tries to file paperwork under my name again," he chuckled. "You've got nothing to worry about. This time we're doing things the right way, neighbors first, charters last." We sat on the dock for a while, watching the lake ripple smooth under the breeze. No cabins, no signs. Just the sound of water lapping against the shore that still belonged, without question, to me.